In today's video, we're going to talk about the good old rat race. Hope you like my drawing there. And more than likely you're in it, what you can do about it, how to get out of it, and last but not least, what you can do to ensure your kids will know about it and hopefully avoid it. Question, do you remember back when you first started school? So what was your goal in kindergarten? It was to make it to first grade, right? And this process continued, first grade, second grade, etc., till you got to high school, right? And that's when the real pressure was put on to not only make good grades, but to what? To do well in the ACT. And what happened when you got to college? You either go out into the real world or you go to professional school or something else. You know, for me, it was dental school, or it could be medical school or whatever. And after putting in a lot of hard work to start the career you've always wanted, now comes another struggle for success. But that's the American dream, right? And again, there always seems to be like this ladder that's in front of you that you're always reaching for. And then one day you suddenly wake up and you're staring at this 50-year-old dude in the mirror, but you feel cheated. And if at this point you're like, I should have already arrived. But looking back, you feel the same as you've always felt. And you thought during all of these working years you put in, you were going to get somewhere, but guess what? You're in the exact same place that you started. Why? It's because all along you've been in a race that you can't win. You've been in the rat race. All right, so what exactly is the rat race? Well, if you look up in the Webster Dictionary, it actually defines rat race as the unpleasant life of people who have a current job that require them to work very hard in order to compete with others. And they compete with others on three things: for money, for power, and for status. And this competitive struggle actually causes you to work year after year, and yet you still find that you're spinning your wheels, but guess what? You're not getting anywhere. And you're trapped and you're asking yourself, you know what? There's got to be a better way, right? So what exactly is what's the real rat race? Well, the real rat race is somebody that's actually living on the financial edge. They're working a day job and they're one paycheck away from being broke. Not a good thing. And this person feels as though the moment money comes into their life, it's gone, it immediately disappears. And the more responsibilities that you have, the more dangerous this relationship becomes. And their entire financial position could literally turn upside down with the loss of a job and an unexpected injury or some other type of financial emergency. Now, if any of these things happen, their job no longer becomes an option. It becomes a necessity in order to keep funding their lifestyle. And they need to take a different approach to their financial situation, but guess what? They don't know what to do. Tyler Durden once said, the things you own end up owning you. So let me talk to you about where I first learned about the rat race. And it was after I read The Purple Bible, or Kiyosaki's Rich Dad, Poor Dad. And he actually defines it as the vicious cycle we learn actually from a young age, that the only way that we get ahead is to what? Go to school, we have to study hard, we got to make good grades, we get a job, and we work harder and harder to what? Constantly try to get ahead. And he also agrees what other financial gurus preach, that this rat race, it's a losing game. You can't win it. And his reasoning is that it makes you entirely dependent on other people, which includes your parents, your teachers, your boss, etc. And this dependency on these people, it completely shuts your mind off from other possibilities and ways that you can function in today's world. And he also taught something that I've spoken to you about before in other videos, It's the cash flow quadrant. And on this left side of the cash flow quadrant, you've got your employees, you have the self-employed like myself, you have the big business owners, and you have the investors. And those that are on this left side over here, the employees and the self-employed, guess what? They're in the rat race. And if they don't go to work, the employees or the self-employed, then no money comes in. And he states that the easiest thing to do is to invest in assets that will provide financial freedom using active income along the way. This is how, when you start studying successful people, this is how they operate. It all starts with financial education, which I'm glad that you're here because you're getting some of that today. That's where it starts. And typically that our perceptions of money are sometimes more crucial than our ability to generate it, especially when our brains are wired in such a way that prevents us sometimes from being financially sensible. Think about it. Most white-collar professionals in the US, physicians, dentists, pharmacists, engineers, etc., most earn a decent six-figure income, right? But does that really matter if at the end of each year they have nothing to show for it? So they make all this money, but where's the disconnect? And I really think it's time that we've actually solved this mystery. But I also want to explore how we can go about better understanding money as what? I don't know about you, but we receive zero financial education when we go to school, right? Even in professional schools, medical school, dental school, and it's crazy. It's like that, but it is what it is. So if we're going to start down this road, the first question that we should ask is, what exactly is money? In other words, to you, what does money represent? Whether you purchase, a pair of shoes from Zappos or you're paid for your time treating patients in your clinic. What's the significance of money in these transactions? Think about it. Money is nothing more than a medium of exchange that facilitates the sale or the purchase of goods between two parties. And this tells us what it can do, but not so much what it represents. So a better way of looking at money is this. It's an expression of value. Money is an expression of value. Now, you'll pay a certain amount of money for something because you perceive its value to be equivalent to the amount of money you just handed over. So, for example, my wife, she would probably pay $100 for a pair of Tory Burch flip-flops, which I don't know who Tory Burch is, but she's got a couple pairs laying around the house. But she'd never consider shelling out $15 for a regular pair of flip-flops. Oh, so why is that? It's because of that perceived value of the two types of footwear. She thinks she's getting more value from the higher price ones, so she will pay more for that. Okay, so if money is an expression of value, now what? How does this change the reality of a surgeon making $500,000 a year yet living paycheck to paycheck? What about the person on the other end that's consumed by credit card debt? And to answer these questions, we have to start looking at the relationship of money. So let's look at your relationship of money. Have you ever thought about that? What is your relationship with money? If you take the word cash flow, that's the money that's coming into your life. It's flowing into your life, but it also flows out, right? These flows represent your income coming in and then the expenses or your production and consumption. Now, money will enter your life based on the value, remember? Money's expression of value. So money will enter your life based on the value you've provided in the workplace. And it will turn around and leave once you've consumed something such as a Netflix subscription or a side by side or a snow skiing trip somewhere. And many financial experts out there, they'll actually look at somebody's net worth as sort of a metric for determining their relationship between how much they consume and how much they produce. Like, oh, your net worth's $2 million, or it's $1 million, or it's negative $100,000. So you can kind of tell, well, he owns more than he owes, or vice versa. So what about your situation? So think about all the money that has, over your career, has entered your life up until this point, and think about all that's exited. How much of that do you still have, whether it's in savings or investments? So which part of this consumption versus production relationship do you think need improving? Probably the likelihood is both. That's what most people need help with. And it doesn't matter, honestly, what you make a year, because for the majority of us, the biggest issue has to do with the consumption part. Studies have shown that in the United States, 78% of workers are living paycheck to paycheck. The worst part of this is, of those 78% of people, over half of those make over $100,000 a year. So when somebody is well paid above the average salary and yet still finds a way to somehow spend it all or more, then their relationship, think about it, their relationship with consumption, it's got to be corrected before addressing anything regarding their production. Case in point, why do you think so many lottery winners and pro athletes file for bankruptcy? It's because their production means nothing when they don't correct that problem with consumption. All right, so now we get a good idea of what the rat race is and what it's involved in, and the money and your relationship with money, etc. So let's talk about how we can start thinking about getting out of this rat race. And the first step of exiting the rat race, it's actually something that, if you remember back an old Michael Jackson song, and it actually starts with, and I'm not a very good artist, as you can tell, but one of the first steps to start with is you and this man in the mirror. That's where it starts. That is the first step in. I mean, it's not anybody else. It starts with you. Specifically, it begins with reflecting on your personal relationship with money. Take a look at what some of the financial gurus teach out there, like Dave Ramsey, etc. What he teaches his audience regarding, he always starts with, you need to calculate, anybody that comes in, he's always asking them, what about your monthly expenses, such as food, transportation, utilities, housing, entertainment, etc. And once you get a grasp on these things, he recommends you start with a budget, right? You need to create a budget and you decide each month how much you can spend within each of those categories he breaks down. So think about it. If you don't take control over your behavior as a consumer, then getting your financial life together, it's going to be next to impossible. And if you listen to anything to Dave Ramsey, he's all about the frugality, and the quickest way is to wealth is living below your means. Whether you follow him or not, I mean, that's what he teaches. In other words, you want to have a lifestyle that still leaves you with enough money left over so you can save and invest for the future. Because as you know, or you may not know, his entire philosophy is around the 7 baby steps to financial peace. Now, once you get your mind up that you want to exit the rat race, starting with an emergency fund, which is actually, for him, baby step number 1, which basically states that you want to save up at least 3 to 6 months in some sort of account to cover personal expenses, 3 to 6 months worth of personal expenses. The idea is, if you have a financial emergency, which yesterday we did, our air conditioner went out, then we could use funds in our emergency fund to pay for this emergency, because emergencies are going to happen, instead of going into further debt when these emergencies come up. That's the whole point of emergency fund. All right, does that make sense? Let me ask you a question. Have you ever heard of the phrase keeping up with the Joneses? If you Google it, keeping up with the Joneses states it's to show that one is as good as other people by getting what they have and doing what they do. And really this phrase, it summarizes the massive problem of consumption. Remember, we talked about this down here. Always going to have an issue with consumption. You got to correct that first. So when people around you are buying stuff, a lot of times you get the urge to buy it too. Typically, we do this because we don't want to be outdone by our friends and buddies, right? They buy a new SUV, we do. They get a new pool, we get a new pool, and we probably get a new hot tub. They take a really nice trip, and we take an even nicer one. And all of this stems from one area: social pressure. It's huge. And as you know, social media really escalates this pressure. So my question to you is this: do you care about it appearing as though you have money, or do you actually want to have money? And the rat race, it isn't as much about working a 9-to-5 job, but living where you're always chasing the next thing, whether it's a paycheck or a material possession or whatever. Unfortunately, by living like this, you put your goals on the back burner because you're in this race. And let's be honest, the rat race sucks. What's the point of making money or imagining as much wealth as possible when your relationship with money, it means losing it all or having to work nonstop in order to fund that lifestyle? That is a real rat race. And if you truly care about exiting the rat race, let me tell you what you do first. You unfriend or unsubscribe, want to unsub the Joneses. That's what you want to do. So let's talk about what the most common path to escaping the rat race is. Guess what? It's real simple. The most common path, the best way to get out of the rat race is simply reaching financial independence as quickly as possible, no matter where you are in your career. If you can do this, that's it. You're out. This is the first thing to focus on. And even though that you know it and a lot of people know it, so few will ever do it. So few will ever achieve it. I talk to doctors in their 50s, 60s, sometimes in their 70s, and they're still in the rat race, even though they know that becoming financial independent wins the race. And the first step in reaching financial independence is to figure out your spending. Remember, we talked about that budget. And this is extremely important, as your goal is to replace your monthly expenses with passive income as quickly as possible. Guess what? After that happens, you've reached financial independence, and you've now officially exited the race. Actually, Kiyosaki, he has his own 3-step formula, which is basically like this, to achieve financial independence. He talks about buying assets such as real estate. And what you want to do is buy assets that are going to cash flow. All right. They're going to produce income like rental properties. And you use the cash flow, you use the passive income from these assets to pay these monthly expenses, to pay your house note, to pay your cell phone note, to pay your car note, or whatever it is. And once this monthly cash flow from these assets gets to the point where it's equal to or greater than your monthly living expenses, then you're financially independent. If you want to work, great. If you don't want to work, you don't have to, because you have other things producing, you have other little oil wells out there producing money for you. But when you talk to financial advisors, they tell us that the most common way to escape the rat race is through what? It's through, you got to get into traditional investments. And most of us are real familiar with investing in the stock market, stocks, mutual funds, bonds, etc. So what do they teach you? They teach you the goal is to amass a nest egg big enough during your working years, and then what? You slowly draw down on it, and after you retire with hopes of never running out, right? But the problem is, what if you're miserable and you're in this rat race and you can't wait to get out? And you don't want to wait 30 years until you saved up enough in this method. To me, it's just not a very good exit strategy. Plus, should any unexpected expenses pop up during retirement, then what? Then all these withdrawal rates and everything else tell us, guess what? It just goes out the window. Now, for my wife and I, and if you've been on this YouTube channel, we appreciate it very much. You've probably heard me talk about passive real estate. For us, this is what we're currently investing in, real estate syndications, to get out of the rat race. And unlike the stock market, for me, real estate, this is on a wall. I get real estate. It's physical. It's just easy for me to understand. You invest in something, right, that's producing income. You rent it out, and you collect a check. And all the check is, the passive income is the difference between the expenses that you're paying and the income coming in, right? So you got the expenses that you're paying, you got the rent checks that you're paying, and what's left over, that difference is what you put in your pocket. And that's what you use to pay your expenses. And the great thing that I love about syndication, especially as being a busy professional, is syndications are passive. This means that you do no active work. Well, who does the work then? Well, somebody called a sponsor or the general partners in these real estate deals. They're the ones that go in and they buy these big apartment buildings. They're the ones that manage it and run it. And they're the ones that send you a check. And they do all these, all the day-to-day operations, so you get paid. But what this is going to do, this takes a mindset shift from the traditional investments, the accumulation model that we've always been told by advisors is the only way to invest for retirement. And instead, shifting from that accumulation model to investing for cash flow instead. And using this model, you're slowly going to start chipping away at your living expenses. All right. Now, I don't ask much from my viewers, but I do have one request from you. After you grasp this concept and you actually begin implementing it in your life, in your financial life, I encourage you to get your kids involved as soon as they're old enough and get them to start learning. Why? Well, who do you want them to learn from about money? You want them to learn from social media or their friends or their teachers? No, you want to be the ones to teach them this because it's very important. Get them started like we did with reading books. And I bought Kiyosaki's cash flow board game for them last year. And the object of the game is what we've been talking about the whole time, that you can teach your kids, is to accumulate enough passive income to become independent from your job. And last year, I'll never forget the first time I was playing. My son was 13 at the time. And of course, he won the game and got out of the rat race first. But we were playing, and he looked me straight in the eye and he said, "Dad, are you still in the rat race?" He wasn't talking about the game. He was talking about life. He said, "Are you still in the rat race?" And I told him that unfortunately I was, but I was in the process of getting out. And he paused a few seconds, and I could tell he was like in deep thought, and he was thinking. He said, and I'll never forget this, he said, "Dad, that must suck, doesn't it?" He was right. Think about this. That kid at 13 years old, at that time, he already got it. And it takes most of us, it took me years and years of working, and you're knee deep in the grind every day, and to realize that you're in a rat race, that you can't win. But what you can do is you can actually teach your kids early on what it is and how to avoid it, even before getting in this race, themselves. And what's crazy is this passive income concept, it was never taught in my 25 plus years of formal education. You probably were never taught about passive income in high school or college or whatever other school education that you went to, were you? And yet this passive income, it's actually what makes the wealthy wealthy. So now that you know all this, does it surprise you that the majority of the wealth is held by only 1% of the population? It doesn't surprise me at all. So why is it that you should get out of the rat race? Now, as a periodontist, I'm well aware, and I talk to people and I get emails from doctors, and I know this is going on a lot. I've got, unfortunately, I had two friends. One was a cardiac ER doctor, and one was a local dentist. Unfortunately, a few years ago, committed suicide, and part of it had to be with regarding Dr. Burnout, and it's just becoming more and more prevalent, unfortunately. And studies show that more than 50% of the doctors are claiming that they're burning out. I recently watched a Amazon Prime documentary, I believe it was called "Do No Harm." Great documentary, and it actually it portrayed individuals that were stuck and miserable with their career in medicine. And many of these people, they hated their jobs. They worked all the time. They worked like 80 to 100 hours a week. But the thing is, they felt trapped because they had all this debt. I remember one person on the show they interviewed, and he was like, I have $300,000 in student loan debt, and it's not like I can just go get a job tomorrow at Starbucks. I feel trapped, yet I have no other training for anything else. Now, with the pressure of treating patients, when the pressure of treating patients, they're combined with the responsibility that you're going to have when you get out with family and kids and that sort of thing, what'll happen is you get so deep in this rat race, that's when it starts leading to burnout, unfortunately. And I've taught my kids that there's always going to be somebody that's faster, that's stronger, that's better looking, that's smarter, that has more money than them, no matter what. And if we always get caught up in comparing ourselves with others instead of doing the best that God has allowed us to do, guess what? You're always going to be in the rat race. I tell my boys this all the time. So what do you think? Are you in the rat race now? I want you to do me a favor, and I want you to leave me a comment below this video. Two things: whether or not you're currently in the rat race, and then if you are in the rat race, what you're doing or what you're going to do now to get out of it. Take care.